They say home is where the heart is. That belonging is a feeling you carry, not a place you find. But what if you've never felt at home anywhere? Not because you're rootless or restless, but because you were born in a moment so rare, so specific, that the world shifted beneath your feet before you even understood what solid ground felt like. What if you grew up in one era and came of age in another, and that transition left you suspended between two worlds, fluent in both languages, but never quite native to either? What if the reason you felt out of place your entire life isn't because something is wrong with you, but because you belong to a generation that was never supposed to exist? If you were born between roughly 1977 to 1983, you know this feeling intimately. You are a Xennial, a micro-generation, a sliver of time caught between Gen X and millennials, too young for one, too old for the other, and psychologically shaped by that exact tension. You remember a childhood without screens. You played outside until dark. You made plans on landlines and kept them because there was no way to cancel. You were bored, and that boredom taught you things no app ever could. But you also came of age online. You learned to adapt, to navigate digital spaces, to speak the language of a world that didn't exist when you were born. And that bridging, that constant translation between analog and digital, between old values and new realities, created something in you that most people don't understand. A deep, quiet sense of displacement, of not fitting, of being slightly out of sync with everyone around you. This isn't about nostalgia. This is about identity. This is about what it does to a person to live perpetually in the in-between. Because what no one tells you is this: being the bridge between two worlds means you never get to rest on either side. This isn't about which generation you belong to. It's about what it feels like to belong to none. Let's begin. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with being a Xennial. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's just a quiet, persistent sense that you're always slightly out of step, that you understand both sides of every generational divide, but can't fully claim either. When Gen X talks about their cynicism, their latchkey childhoods, their grunge rebellion, you recognize pieces of it. You absorbed their skepticism. You were shaped by their hands-off parenting, but you were too young to fully live it. You didn't experience the same economic collapse or cultural rupture in your formative years. And when millennials talk about their digital nativity, their social justice awakening, their student debt and avocado toast, you understand that too. You lived through it, you adapted to it, but you weren't born into it. You had to learn it. And that learning curve makes you fundamentally different. You exist in the overlap, the liminal space, the margin between chapters. And here's what no one tells you about margins: they're exhausting, because you're always translating, always code switching, always reading the room and adjusting your references, your tone, your identity to fit the audience. You can talk to a boomer about their music and actually know the songs. You can navigate a Gen Z meme page without feeling confused. You understand analog systems and digital platforms with equal fluency. But that fluency comes at a cost, and the cost is this: you never get to just be. You're always performing a version of yourself that bridges, that explains, that makes others comfortable. And in that constant performance, you lose track of who you are when no one is watching. You've spent your entire life feeling like you don't quite fit, like everyone else got a generational identity, a cohesive narrative, a sense of these are my people, and you got a question mark. Because your generation was never defined, never marketed to, never given a name most people recognize. You are the forgotten micro-generation, the in-between, the translator, the bridge. And bridges don't get to belong to either side. They just hold the weight of everyone crossing. We are told that generational labels don't matter, that they're just marketing constructs, arbitrary lines drawn around birth years that mean nothing. But the truth is, they mean everything. Because generational identity isn't just about what year you were born. It's about what world you were born into. What cultural narrative shaped your childhood? What technology wired your brain during its most formative years? And when you're born in a narrow window where the entire world fundamentally changed, where childhood and adulthood existed in two completely different realities, something happened psychologically that most people never experience. You had an analog childhood. You were outside. You were bored. You had unstructured time and freedom and privacy. You made mistakes that weren't photographed or posted. You existed in a world that moved slower, where connection required effort, where you had to show up physically or you didn't exist. That childhood shaped your brain. It gave you independence, resourcefulness, the ability to entertain yourself, a tolerance for boredom, a respect for privacy. But then the internet arrived, right as you were coming of age, right as you were forming your adult identity, right as you were entering college, the workforce, relationships, and suddenly everything changed. The rules changed. The economy changed. The way people communicated changed. The way people worked, loved, existed, changed, and you had to adapt. You had to learn the new language. You had to become digitally fluent or be left behind. And you did. You adapted beautifully. You learned social media, smartphones, remote work, digital communication. You became bilingual in a way most people aren't. But here's what that adaptation cost you. It cost you continuity. It cost you the sense that the world you were prepared for is the world you're living in. Because it's not. You were raised with one set of rules, and the rules changed halfway through, and no one acknowledged it. No one validated the disorientation. No one said you're navigating something unprecedented. Instead, you were just expected to keep up, to adapt, to not complain. And you did. But the cost of that constant adaptation is a deep, quiet sense of displacement, the feeling that you're always a little out of place, always translating, always aware that you don't fully belong. On the surface, you look fine, you function, you succeed, you adapt. But beneath that, there's a loneliness that no one sees. A loneliness that comes from never having a clear identity, never having a cohesive narrative, never being able to say, this is my generation and this is who we are, without feeling like you're lying a little bit. Let's go back to where this started, back to the exact moment in history that created you. You were born in the late 70s or early 80s. Your parents were likely boomers, and boomer parents, especially during this era, were hands-off in ways that would be considered neglect today. You were a latchkey kid, or close to it. You had freedom, autonomy. You were expected to figure things out on your own, to be self-sufficient, to not need constant supervision or validation. And that freedom taught you independence, self-reliance, the belief that you should be able to handle things on your own. But it also taught you loneliness. Because freedom without connection is just isolation. You learned early that your needs were your responsibility, that complaining was inconvenient, that the world wouldn't take care of you, so you had to take care of yourself, and you internalized that message. You learned to be strong, to not ask for help, to keep your struggles private, and that early independence, that early self-sufficiency became a core part of your identity. But here's what it also did. It made you wary of depending on others. It made you reluctant to be vulnerable. It made you believe that needing help was weakness. And so you learned to carry everything alone, to manage, to cope, to survive. And you've been doing that ever since. Then there's the cultural context. You grew up during a specific moment in history. The Cold War was ending. The economy was shifting. Technology was beginning its exponential rise. You were too young to understand the full implications, but you absorbed the anxiety, the uncertainty, the sense that the world was changing faster than anyone could predict. And that anxiety, that uncertainty, became background noise in your developing brain. Your nervous system learned to stay alert, to scan for threats, to prepare for instability, because the world you grew up in was transitioning, and transitions are inherently unstable. You didn't have the cynical detachment of Gen X, who had already hardened themselves to disappointment, and you didn't have the optimistic earnestness of millennials, who were raised with participation trophies and encouragement. You were caught in between. You had hope, but it was cautious. You had ambition, but it was tempered by realism. You learned early that the world doesn't owe you anything. But you also believed quietly that if you worked hard enough, things would be okay. And then the world changed again. The economy collapsed. Jobs disappeared. The social contract broke. And the hope you'd been carrying, that cautious optimism, started to feel naive. But you didn't have the language to articulate that disillusionment. You didn't have a generational narrative to anchor it. You just had a quiet sense of betrayal that you couldn't quite name. Here's what neuroscience tells us. The human brain is shaped by the environment it develops in. And the environment you developed in was fundamentally unstable, not in a traumatic way, but in a transitional way. You grew up during a period of unprecedented change. The technological shift you experienced between childhood and adulthood was faster and more radical than any previous generation had navigated. And when a brain develops during rapid environmental change, it learns to be adaptable. It becomes highly attuned to context. It learns to read cues, adjust behavior, scan for shifts. This makes you resilient, flexible, capable of navigating complexity. But it also means your nervous system never fully learned to rest, because rest requires predictability, and your world was never predictable. It was always changing, always shifting, always requiring you to adapt. So your nervous system learned to stay alert, to stay flexible, to always be ready to adjust. And that state of constant readiness is exhausting. Then there's attachment theory. The way you form relationships, the way you navigate intimacy, the way you experience connection is deeply shaped by your early environment. And your early environment was characterized by independence, by self-sufficiency, by the expectation that you should figure things out on your own. So you developed what psychologists call an avoidant attachment style. Not fully, not in every relationship, but in certain ways. You learn to be self-reliant, to not burden others, to keep your needs small. And that made you independent, capable, strong. But it also made you lonely. Because independence, when taken to its extreme, is just isolation. You struggle to ask for help. You struggle to be vulnerable. You struggle to believe that people will show up for you without resentment. And so you keep parts of yourself hidden. You manage on your own. You carry your struggles privately. And that privacy, that self-reliance, that independence feels like strength. But deep down, it also feels like loneliness. And here's where it gets more complicated. Here's the layer most people miss. You didn't just experience a technological shift. You experienced a values shift. You were raised with the values of individualism, self-reliance, and stoicism. You were told to be tough, to figure it out, to not complain. But you came of age in a world that was starting to value community, vulnerability, and emotional intelligence. A world that was starting to talk about mental health, about therapy, about feelings. And those two value systems are fundamentally at odds. So you carry both. You value independence but crave connection. You're stoic but secretly sensitive. You're self-reliant but quietly exhausted. And that internal conflict is constant, because you're always negotiating between the values you were raised with and the values the world now holds. You're too independent to fully embrace the millennial emphasis on community and support. It feels weak. It feels like too much. But you're also too aware to dismiss it. You know the isolation is killing you. You know the stoicism is unsustainable. So you exist in the tension, always. You try to be vulnerable, but it feels performative. You try to ask for help, but it feels like failure. You try to connect, but you don't know how without losing yourself. And that tension, that constant negotiation between who you were taught to be and who you're trying to become, is exhausting. It's exhausting in ways no one sees, because on the outside, you look fine, you function, you succeed, but on the inside, you're constantly translating, constantly adjusting, constantly managing the gap between your internal experience and your external presentation, and no one knows, because you've learned not to show it. And here's what that constant performance costs you. It costs you authenticity, because you're so busy managing how you're perceived that you lose track of who you actually are. It costs you intimacy, because you can't let people in if you're always performing. And you can't stop performing because you don't trust that the real you is enough. It costs you peace, because you're always scanning, always adjusting, always aware that you're slightly out of sync with everyone around you. And it costs you joy, because joy requires presence, and you can't be fully present when you're always translating. You're always aware of the gap between how you were raised and how the world works now, the gap between what you value and what the culture values, the gap between who you are and who you're expected to be. And that awareness, that constant vigilance, that perpetual state of translation, is exhausting in ways that are invisible to everyone else but crushing to you. It costs you a sense of belonging, because you don't fully fit into Gen X spaces. You're not cynical enough. You're not detached enough. And you don't fully fit into millennial spaces. You're not earnest enough. You're not digitally native enough. So you exist in the margins. You observe, you bridge, you translate, but you don't belong. And that lack of belonging isn't just social, it's psychological, it's existential. Because humans need to belong. We need to know where we fit. We need a collective identity that reflects us back to ourselves. And you don't have that. You have fragments, pieces, but not a cohesive narrative. So you've learned to create belonging wherever you can. You adapt. You find common ground. You make yourself useful. But deep down, there's an ache. A quiet, persistent sense that you're always on the outside looking in, always observing, always translating, never fully home. And it costs you identity stability, because you've had to reinvent yourself so many times. Every time the world changed, you adapted, you learned the new language. But every adaptation meant leaving a part of yourself behind, not erased, just archived. And after a while, you start to wonder, who am I really? Beneath all the adaptation, beneath all the code switching, beneath all the performance, who am I when I'm not translating for someone else? And that's a terrifying question, because the answer isn't simple. It's not cohesive. It's layered, fragmented, multiple. You're carrying all the versions of yourself that were necessary for different eras, different contexts, different worlds. And you're holding all of them, all the time. And that multiplicity feels like chaos. Like you're scattered, like you don't have a core. But here's where the story shifts. Here's where everything changes. What if the thing you've been seeing as a problem is actually your greatest strength? What if feeling out of place isn't a flaw? What if it's a superpower? What if being born in the exact moment the world shifted gave you something most people will never have? Perspective. Think about it. You can see both sides. You understand Gen X's cynicism and millennials' earnestness. You can navigate analog systems and digital platforms. You can code switch between different cultural contexts effortlessly. You're not trapped in one worldview. You're not limited to one way of thinking. You're free. You're fluid. You're adaptable in a way that's almost invisible because it's so natural to you. And that adaptability, that ability to bridge worlds, to translate between generations, to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, is one of the most valuable skills in a rapidly changing world. You're not lost between two worlds. You're fluent in both. You're not displaced. You're a bridge. You're not scattered. You're expansive. And what you've been experiencing as loneliness, as not fitting, as being out of place, is actually the psychological signature of someone who understands more than most people ever will. You don't fit into one box because you were never meant to. You were meant to connect the boxes, to translate between them, to help people on opposite sides understand each other. And that is not a weakness. That is a gift. But here's the thing. You've been so focused on trying to fit, on trying to find your place, that you forgot to honor what you've been carrying. You forgot to acknowledge how hard it is to live in the in-between. How exhausting it is to constantly translate. How lonely it is to understand both sides, but belong to neither. And you deserve that acknowledgement. You deserve to know that what you've been experiencing is real. That the loneliness is real. That the exhaustion is real. That the sense of displacement is real. But so is your strength. So is your adaptability. So is your perspective. And it's time to stop seeing yourself as someone who doesn't fit, and start seeing yourself as someone who fits everywhere because you understand everywhere. You are not broken. You are not deficient. You are not missing something that everyone else has. You are carrying something that most people don't have. And that something is the ability to bridge, to translate, to see. And the world needs that, desperately. Healing for you is not about finding your people. It's about realizing that your people are everywhere. Your people are the other translators, the other bridges, the other Xennials who've been quietly carrying this same weight, wondering if they're the only ones who feel out of place. And there are millions of you, scattered across the world, living in the margins, translating between generations, holding the tension. And you are not alone. Healing is also about releasing the idea that you need a cohesive generational identity, that you need to fit neatly into a category, that you need a clear cultural narrative. Because you don't, and you never will. And that's okay. Your identity is not fragmented, it's layered, it's rich, it's complex. You're not confused, you're nuanced, you're not lost, you're free. And that freedom, that ability to move fluidly between worlds, to hold multiple truths, to see from multiple perspectives is not chaos. It's mastery. Healing is about owning that mastery, owning the fact that you don't have to choose. You don't have to declare loyalty to one generation or another. You can hold all of it. You can be all of it. You can honor the analog childhood and the digital adulthood. You can value independence and connection. You can be stoic and sensitive. You can be cynical and hopeful. You can be both. You can be all. You can be between. And that is not a problem. That is power. Integration is about understanding that your entire life has been preparing you for this moment in history. This moment where the world is more divided than ever. Where generations are more polarized than ever. Where people are screaming across divides and no one is listening. And you're the one who can listen. You're the one who can translate. You're the one who can bridge. Because you've been doing it your entire life. You understand the old world and the new world. You understand the cynics and the optimists. You understand independence and community. And that understanding, that ability to hold multiple truths without collapsing into one or the other, is rare. It's valuable. It's needed. So maybe your purpose isn't to belong to one side. Maybe your purpose is to connect the sides. Maybe your role isn't to find your place. Maybe your role is to be the space where others can find common ground. Maybe you're not supposed to fit. Maybe you're supposed to bridge. And maybe that bridging, that constant translation, that perpetual in-betweenness is exactly what makes you essential. You've spent your life feeling out of place. But what if the truth is that you're not out of place? What if you're exactly where you're supposed to be? In the in-between. In the liminal. In the space where transformation happens. Because liminal spaces are sacred. They're where old worlds end and new worlds begin. They're where meaning is made. Where connection happens. And that's where you live. That's who you are. You're not out of place. You're the place where worlds meet. And that is not a burden. That is your birthright. So own it. Own the complexity. Own the duality. Own the fact that you're not one thing, you're many things. Own the fact that you're a Xennial. A micro-generation that most people don't even know exists. A sliver of time that created something psychologically unprecedented. You're the translator, the adapter, the bridge. And the world doesn't just need you. The world is lost without you. Because without bridges, there is no connection. Without translators, there is no understanding. Without people who can hold multiple truths, there is only division. And you've been holding those truths your entire life. Not because it's easy, but because it's who you are. You don't need to find your place. You are the place. And that is everything. If parts of this felt familiar, if you've spent your entire life feeling slightly out of sync, like you understand everyone but no one fully understands you, like you're fluent in 2 languages but native in neither, know that you are not alone. There are millions of us, born in that narrow window between 1977 and 1983, raised in one world, coming of age in another, carrying the quiet weight of constant adaptation. You are a Xennial, and your psychology is real. Your experience is valid. Your sense of being out of place is not a flaw. It's the signature of someone who's been bridging worlds their entire life. And that bridging is not easy. It's exhausting. It's lonely. It's invisible to most people. But it's also powerful. It's rare. It's needed. You've been a translator your entire life. And translators don't get to rest on either side. But translators are essential. Translators make connection possible. And you've been doing that work quietly, invisibly, without recognition, your entire life. If you'd like to stay connected to this space, you're welcome here. This is a place where we explore the psychology of the in-between, the micro-experiences, the forgotten identities, the liminal spaces. This is a place for the translators, the adapters, the ones who don't fit neatly but understand deeply. If that's you, you belong here. And if you'd like, you can share your own truth below, not because you have to, but because your words might be the mirror another Xennial has been searching for. Your story might be the validation someone else needs to finally understand that they're not broken, they're just between. You are not out of place. You are the bridge. And bridges are sacred. Be kind to the part of you that's been carrying this weight. Honor the part of you that learned to translate. Celebrate the part of you that can see what others can't. You've been holding 2 worlds your entire life, and that's not too much. That's exactly enough. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness,